So, welcome back to Couples in Focus podcast. I'm Thomas here, and I am joined, as always, by Michael. And we are continuing our episode on looking at sexuality and couples and how that all play out. And today, the main focus is really going to be on, how do we have these conversations about sex, and also what is blocking us actually having these? Why does it often end up in this silent death, as I call it,
hmm
over time,
hmm
where nobody mention anything and eventually we're so dissatisfied, right? So, yeah, let's get started, Michael. And
Let's do
I'd
it.
love to get your input on all this.
Yeah, yeah. Looking forward to it.
Amazing. So, where do we start with all this? It's a big topic. Maybe, I think, as you mentioned before the podcast, right? You
Yeah.
said, let's recognize how
hmm
difficult this is. So, I think that's maybe a good place for us to start, right? And I liked what you
Yeah.
said. You said, this is really hard. It might sound simple. We might give you some tips, but actually, it's really vulnerable, right? I like when you said it's
mm
not like talking about who's washing the dishes. There's a lot
Right.
more at stake here, right?
Yeah.
Because,
There's a lot more of their person at stake, right? Who's
yes,
washing the dishes
yes,
doesn't say a lot about my person, but so much of our identity about whether we're good at sex or bad at sex. These messages also get stirred into whether I am good or I am bad.
yes,
Right? So it's really, really vulnerable stuff we're talking about.
yes, because that can be a really devastating message, right? And that might
Yeah.
lead us into one of the things I know we want to discuss today is what are some of the blocks? Like, why are people not having these conversations, right? And what's preventing them from actually doing that?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So we're kind of talking about these, like when you try to talk about sex, these are some of the things that oftentimes will happen. Couples do try to talk about this, that will take their conversation in the wrong direction, which will likely end up in them having an argument, shutting down. Do it. They're going to do all the same things, right? But when we do that dance, right, the cycle that we so often talk about, the pursue withdrawal cycle. When we do that around dishwashing, yep, that sucks. Doesn't feel good. Nobody likes it. When we do it around sex, it just hurts even more, right? Because one of the things that I think is really important to remember is both people, generally speaking, want a healthy, engaged, and decently frequent sexual relationship, right? I'm not saying someone isn't I want five a day, I want a five a week. And someone's like, no, maybe not that much, right? There's going to be varying it, but it's not like one person's like, I'm just not going to want to have sex ever again. And someone wants to have sex all the time. It's far more in the middle than that. And so here we have two people who generally want to have a sexual relationship, who would like a decently frequent sexual relationship, but can't have a conversation around it when we have a couple of things get present. So we want to take a second, kind of name some of these blockers. The first one I would say is when we try to find the reason. Right, sorry, I'm on a studio recording here, but you can't see my air quotes around the reason. So I'll have to tell you, air quotes, the reason. Uh, when we try to find the reason we aren't having sex, the reason becomes something about our partner, something they are doing or aren't doing. And this becomes the blame game, right? So oftentimes when couples come together to discuss their sexual relationship, it's on this like heated sense of, you never do this thing for me, or you always do this to me, or if you would just try this thing, right? Those kind of blaming startups
Yes.
are never ever going. They're not going to end well.
That's right. It's like, the US nuclear policy is mutual destruction. And I say, if this is how you start a conversation around sex, it is
Yep.
basically assured mutual destruction,
It
right?
is assured mutual
That is the
destruction.
outcome. There will never be a winner, even if your
No.
partner were to back down and say, yes, it's about me. well,
Right.
and you might feel gratification for a second because you get a bit of dopamine being right, then I guarantee you, you have just made your partner feel devastated about themselves.
Hmm.
And that is not
Right.
gonna help your sex life.
It's
So,
not going to help your
so,
sex
so
life.
the find the bad guy is definitely guaranteed mutual destruction, right? Which is
Guaranteed.
why it's never meant to be used, right?
Right. Yeah, we really don't want you to do that. If you're thinking about having a conversation about sex in your relationship and your goal is to I just need my partner to understand what they're doing wrong. We're going to tell you right now. I don't give a lot of direct advice, but I'm going to give some, and that is don't do it. Put the pen down. I'd rather you not talk about sex than go tell your partner what they're doing wrong
Yes,
about your sex life, right?
yes,
That is going to be even worse than just this silent thing you guys are already doing and somehow surviving. So just go back to being
yes,
silent for a moment.
yeah,
And maybe by the end of the episode, we'll have a bit more of an idea of what you might could how you might could approach that. So
yes,
if there's a part of blaming in your approach, right? Recognize that in yourself, right? Really go, am I really here to tell my partner what they're doing wrong?
mm,
As a again, I'll say there's usually goodness behind it, right? If I could just help my partner understand this one thing, then everything could be different, right? So we're saying it
yes.
kind of funny way, but we do
Absolutely.
know
It's a
there's really
desperate
good.
attempt for connection,
It's a
right?
desperate
And you're
attempt.
spot on,
Absolutely.
but we have to laugh about the seriousness of
You have
life
to.
too, right? But
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
we also understand that yes, behind this is a serious attempt to try and fix something that's really painful, and we think that we
Hmm.
can fix it by doing
That's
that.
right.
But I'm just saying that it's the same as think you can fix geopolitics by blowing up a nuclear missile. No, it's
Right.
assured mutual destruction. So I get the
That's right.
intent, but it will never have the impact
That's
that
right.
you hope
That
for,
we're
right?
wanting, which is if we're trying to talk about this, the impact we're trying to do is open up a vulnerable conversation so that we can possibly explore what is happening in our sex life that is keeping us from being able to, both of us mutually, from being able to engage in a meaningful sex life together. Right.
Yes.
So that's the goal. So how do we begin to do that? So the other pieces we'll name is the general moves of the cycle, which is defensiveness and shutting down,
Yes.
right? And so just to kind of take us on a second here, right, just taking a deep breath there. That deep breath can be really important as you take a second to begin to notice, like, what are your defensive moves? In the past, can you take a second and think about a time that you guys have tried to talk about sex? What is your move? Is it to jump in with, but you never this, or I can't believe that? Like, is your move to begin to get defensive when you start to get into this conversation? Again, these things being present is we're going to assure that you do not improve your sex life. So if you find yourself saying, "Yeah, I'm kind of the defensive one," like I get into justifying and, well, you didn't do that, you didn't do that, and I start going in point by point, kind of blaming all the other pieces, right, tossing it back on the other partner. Take a second and say, what is usually happening? What is the message that you're usually getting from your partner? Right? That somehow this is all my fault. That's normally where I see my defensiveness come from. Is somehow I'm sitting there in a place going, this is all my fault. And the only way to help someone understand that it's not all my fault is to defensively show them all the things they are doing wrong.
Yes. And I
Right?
can't accept that something fundamentally is wrong with me. So all I can do is try and shoot it back at you again, or I can disengage altogether.
Or you can
That's
disengage.
pretty much the options I have, right? And then
Yeah, yeah,
maybe I never bring it up again because I don't really want to rock the boat. And even though it feels disconnected and there's sadness and anger around not having a sex life, then it feels better than stir the boat and watch the big waves coming, right? The
that's right.
tsunami. So therefore, I might just stay silent altogether. And that's often what happens, right? People might
Hmm.
have been through the blame game for a while, and then there's just silence because we weren't successful in finding the bad guy, and that didn't work. So now we
Yeah,
just don't really talk about it, and that become quite a desperate place, right? I call it the
yeah,
slow
yeah,
death, right?
yeah.
um but there's another option, and that's kind of what we want to present today, which
Yeah.
is that it is possible to have open conversations about sexuality. And maybe we can talk about some of the blocks that comes up to that, right? Because I think when people here say that, they're like, no, 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 that can just open the tsunami, right? Start the earthquake, and I don't
Yeah,
want
yeah,
that. So,
yeah.
so what are some of the blocks here that kind of comes in the way of us being able to even sit down and start
Mm,
having these conversations?
yeah. Ooh, right. I think about how so many couples have come to my office and they've shared that they are in a fairly like sexless relationship, right? And we don't just describe a sexless relationship as one that never has sex, but one that generally goes through long periods of time without any sexual engagement,
Mm,
right? Now, people do come in with like, yeah, we haven't had sex in 3 years, but there's also couples that come in like, yeah, we might have sex once every 4 months, right? And even that's going to go, okay, there's something going on that I get the sense that a way to talk about it is first recognizing it feels like if we approach this conversation, the dam is going to break. And all the things that we haven't said is just going to come flooding out of us, which often happens. And we just end up in that same painful place.
yes,
And so we can't talk about it. We can't even begin to talk about what makes us nervous about talking about this. And that can be a great first conversation,
yes,
which is just being able to say, I get nervous around talking about sex, and a lot of the sexual withdrawers, emotional pursuers, are going to say, if I try to talk about sex, they're going to want sex, and suddenly it's going to be I have to show up sexually,
yes,
right?
yes, and that can be so scary that I rather avoid it altogether.
Woo, right?
Absolutely.
Don't talk about it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is why I like what you said about maybe we can start by just sharing how hard it is to talk about sex and how
Mm-hmm.
scary that is, even before. I like that. I think that's great. And I think also some of the blocks, if we look at them, we talked about before in our little brainstorm, how we
Mm-hmm.
have external factors, right? And
That's right.
internal factors that really
That's
block
right.
sexuality. And it might be good as you sit and maybe reflect and listen to this. What are some of the things that are making our
Mm-hmm.
sex life really challenging, right? Yes, there's external factors like kids, right? Like
Oh yeah.
working
Oh yeah.
hours, like the demand of life. There can be different physical illnesses, there can be hormonal things, getting older. There's so many things impacting our sexuality. And of course, there's also different preferences, right? But there's so many things, external factors that has an impact
Right.
on why the sex life might slowly
Yeah.
have been not what you
Right.
wanted, right? And then another part of the block to it is what we mentioned a little bit already is the internal factors that kind of block, right? That can be, do I have a tendency to associate a lot of my identity with my sexual performance, right? This performance model we mentioned.
Yeah.
And that might mean that
Absolutely.
I feel a lot of shame if you were ever to say anything except my performance is great, that I would feel really bad about myself. That can really block being able to talk about sex, right? And also
Mm-hmm.
sex in general, because our sexual response is very much impacted by shame, right? Stress is a surefire
Huge.
way to shut down the sexual response.
That's right.
So, yeah, I just want to kind of start the discussion there and just say, hey, there's different
Yeah.
factors here that can impact, that make sex life really difficult, and having conversations about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think about how how many relationships are having conversations, like active conversations around like perimenopause and being able to talk about those things and being able to name, hey, my body's going through a lot of changes right now. I don't even feel comfortable in my own skin. And can you tell your partner that? And can your partner take that in? Right? Because what happens in the silent one, when nobody says anything, is there's a slowing down or stepping away from sexuality as the comfortability in our own skin goes away. But then the message received is somehow something's changed and I'm not worthy. I'm not, I've done something wrong. My partner isn't attracted to me anymore. All the negative messages, right? So anytime there's silence around sexuality, it invites that really terrifying story to come up, right?
That's right.
And so I'll just say like there's you brought up kids earlier. We've got 3 kids. They're all under 12 years old. We have a child in our bed 95% of nights, not all night, but they come in, and one of our children is getting older, so they're staying up later. And my wife and I were talking about that. We're like, "Ooh, this is our like our like together time is getting real squeezed." Like when my kid is up till 10, but I'm tired at 9:30, I'm like, "Oh no, this is hard. This is getting really, really difficult, right?" And so one of the things that we've noticed in our life, and I think I just want to say this for like normalization's sake, we've had periods of time where like our sex life is like frequent and it's more than twice a week, and that goes for a stretch. And then life gets really stressful and job stuff comes up, and then kids are in the room more, and then work stuff gets really heavy for me. And suddenly we kind of look and go, oh man, like we've been really out of sync lately, right? And then we'll go through a period of where it's less than twice a week. But the difference I think that we experience is these are moments we talk about throughout our relationship, right? And there isn't a problem with our partner, but we're able to say, "Whoa, we've been really out of sync lately," and then we start looking at our life together, and we're going, what has been happening, right? Oh, I've noticed that we had a sick kid here, we had a sick kid there. And then, oh yeah, this kid has been up really late lately, and oof, we might need to look at how we are getting these kids down on time and doing this thing, and just oh, have you noticed how tired you've been? I've been really tired. Like, do you feel exhausted at the end of the day? Yeah, I feel exhausted at the end of the day, right? We name all of these things going on, and then we also offer reassurance. Hey, I really love you. Like this, I feel like this is just a moment, right? When's the last time we had a date? When's the last time we got to like some alone time? Oh, you're right. That's been a long time. Oh, right. Okay. Hey, let's make sure that we get someone in. And oftentimes what we'll do is we're like, let's make sure we get someone in who can stay later, right? To make sure all the kids are down, right? Because if the babysitter leaves at 8:30, then I still got parenting to do and I got to go back into that role. But we'll make these plans together and talk about it. But nobody becomes the enemy, and no one in particular becomes the reason, right? Our sex life is waning and waxing and growing and decreasing. It's more the ebbs and flows of life. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think this is so important because you're kind of starting to give the model through this example
Yeah,
of
yeah,
your
you're right.
own
You're right. I
life
am. Yeah.
of how that actually looks like, right? Because what you're describing here in your relationship is that, hey, there's a safety or trust that when something changes, one, we both notice that something has changed, right? We
Hmm.
notice it, and then we come together as a team and look at what are the factors preventing us from having
Yeah,
what we
yeah.
would like to share together. So it's all a team. It's not you and me. It's a team. You're saying, hey, oh, so there's these external factors. Oh yeah, we haven't done this and this is taken over. Let's reprioritize each other, right? And then together you come up with a plan for how to deal with that, right? So that's kind of like, how can we come together and look at what factors are blocking it? That's one of the part. And the other part that we kind of introduced, which is the internal, is also for people themselves to kind of reflect, is what is blocking me from being able to hear my partner?
Hmm.
Is it that as soon as I hear, maybe
Hmm.
a preference they have, I start shaming myself. I start being really harsh on myself, and that makes it impossible to hear this, right? And I just wanted to
Hmm.
mention that because I mentioned it very quickly before this, the performance model, right? And it's something a lot of people listening probably is accustomed to because I think around sex, we have had much of a performance model, right? Pornography
Oh,
is
yeah.
is huge for so many people in our part of the world, which is all about performance, performance, and
And
really,
expectations in that world, right,
yes,
are they are not translatable into reality,
of course not, because it
right?
isn't meant to be reality,
So the
right?
cards become stacked against the partner, right?
Yes. And I think that
So
the performance idea that it's a performance also
mhm.
makes it not possible to do what is probably most important in sexual, which is to be present, right? It takes us
Mm.
out of presence because now we have to focus, am I performing? It also makes it extremely difficult to take feedback. If for performance,
Oof.
I tell myself, which is common as well in this model, I am meant to know. what my partner likes because I know what women likes, right? Which of course is a complete nonsense, but this message still is very prevalent, which makes it hard to hear when your partner say, actually, I like this a bit different. Maybe I need a bit more slowness, whatever it is, because you have learned that you're meant to perform, when actually sex is like, we talked about, it's like when you meet someone and start going on dates, you don't know anything about them. That's why you go out on dates and start asking them questions, and you slowly learn that their preference
Hmm.
is pizza, and not burgers, right? And over time you learn these little preferences, but you didn't expect yourself to know this, right? However,
Yeah.
often in sexuality, we come into this and we have this pressure that we told ourselves, I am meant to, because I'm a man, I'm meant to know what women want, or maybe the other way
Right.
around, right? I'm meant to
Yeah.
know what my partner wants. Of course you don't.
Right.
Just like you don't
Right.
know their preference was pizza. So really the most important, but I remember a guy once asked me, what's your main sex tip? And he was waiting for some physical thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and I said, my main tip for being a good lover really in your partnership is being able to be fully present and being open
Hmm.
and curious about your
Hmm.
partner's response, right? And he was a bit
Well,
baffled by that because that's not what he was expecting to hear,
right.
right? He thought there's
Right.
surely some technique that can always
Well,
apply.
there's something we can do,
Yes,
some oil we can get,
yes,
something that's going to make this thing easy.
yes,
Like
yes,
it's it's it. I will say this: a good sexual relationship does get easy when you can have a good sexual conversation, when conversation is allowed to flow.
yes,
Because even as you were naming, like, oh, we don't expect to know if we're just getting to know someone, we don't know, we're not expecting ourselves to know whether their preference is pizza or hamburger.
yes,
But growing with someone also means remaining open to the idea that their favorites begin to change,
that's right.
right? Like my wife and I, we're very different than we were when we met when I was 11, right?
Yes,
I hope I'm very different than when I was 11. Also, when I was 18, I married her at 20, right? And here we are approaching our 40s. And I hope that we've changed from the time we got married and our preferences have changed and that we've gotten better at some things, but we only know that if we stay curious,
yes,
right? And so even sexual preferences can change,
that's right.
and the, you know, then they can change from evening to evening. What feels good yesterday doesn't feel good today.
Exactly. And this is
Yeah.
why the conversation is ongoing. It's not about just learning
Mm,
a technique, right? Everything is adaptable, even in the moment. And that's why I said being present and attuning and curious is the main thing, right? And it's also okay to get it wrong. But I can even give an example here of how something like this could look like in practice, right? So maybe after having had sex or love making, whatever, with my partner, I could then suddenly turn around and say, hey, something felt a bit different today. And then we had an
mm,
open talk about it. And I said, yes, I think I was a bit misattuned because I wasn't
mm,
fully, normally I'm very present, but I wasn't. I had a lot of other things, son in hospital.
mm,
I wasn't fully present.
mm,
So I said, yeah, I think I was a bit misattuned and I had a lot of stress.
mm,
I just came out. So I wasn't really, because something, and she said, yeah, I did feel a bit different. And she said, I
yeah.
think I needed a bit more slowness and you just had all this stress that needed. And I said, that's true. I didn't fully attune. I said, I apologize about that. And
Hmm.
she said, that's okay. We're not all. And then now we're having a conversation about it, right?
Right.
And this happened
Right.
afterwards when we was lying there being calm. And in this, now we're realigning again. Yeah. So
That's
it was
right.
okay that we misattuned a bit. Nothing
Right.
happened. No damage
Well,
happened.
yeah. Well, that's because you're willing to have the conversation,
Yes.
right? So again, we come back to a trusting sexual relationship, right? That we are allowed to have a conversation.
Yes.
We can get back in line or back aligned. That's a better way to say that.
Mm.
Back aligned means getting out of alignment, not a big deal.
Yes.
But if so often, right, as those who are coming to this saying, how do we have this conversation? They're going to say, but if I say to my partner, hey, that didn't feel so good, they're going to go on a shame spiral,
Yes.
right? And so that becomes the delicate place, right?
Yes.
You named shame earlier. And what often keeps people from having these conversations
Yes.
is being able to mention that didn't feel good or something felt off.
Yes.
or even like, hey, are you okay? Right? Suddenly there's a shame spiral
Yes.
because on the performance side, the vulnerability is my worth and my value hangs on my ability to perform well.
Yes.
And any message that I'm not performing well can send me on a path of self hate, like I'm not good enough, I'm too broken, I can't even get this right, right? And
Yes.
we'll lose our partner to that. And so it becomes a very difficult conversation
That's
where we
right.
have to take it really slow and even name in the beginning, like, hey, I know this can be hard to talk about.
That's right. And this is why I think there really are three components, an example you gave and I gave, that are important to highlight, right? Because
Hmm.
we talked about what killer is silence. What we're saying
Hmm.
here is actually being able to talk about it ongoingly is a key component. Silence is a killer of sex life, right?
I
And
just let's keep saying that over and over. Like good sex starts with good conversation.
yes,
You have to be, if you cannot talk about it, you're going to hit your freeze button
yes,
and not be able to say something. And then your sexual experience is going to fall apart
yes.
because you can't talk about it.
That's right. That's
Right.
right. And then I think the second part is criticism is also a killer, right? Like we talked about. So silence and criticism are killers. So now we kind of talked about what not to do, right? However, you could still
Hmm.
do it perfectly. And we'll talk more about later about ways to
Hmm.
communicate it. But even if you do those things that we say, there can still be the third block and killer, which is shame, right? Which is the
Yep.
internal part of how the receiver get the
Right.
message, whatever you say. And it's true. So that's why there's two things to work on here. That's why I'm mentioning it. There's one is how are we communicating the message?
Hmm.
And then there's for the receiver is how am I receiving the message? Because
That's
unless
right.
both these are, in a place where that's possible, you can't get to the examples we just
Hmm.
gave, right? That require both a
That's right.
receiving partner who doesn't, when my partner said, actually, I needed a bit more slow, I didn't go into a shame spiral and say, oh, I'm a bad
Right.
person, or I'm an inadequate
Right.
lover. I just said, oh, in that moment, I wasn't fully present because my son is in
Yeah.
hospital, and that's
Right.
okay. But I'm
Right.
reattuning now. If I gone into a shame spiral, that could have escalated too, right?
Yeah.
This is why there's
And
both the message and how it's received.
then if you want to take that a further, right? I wonder what would help that partner say in the midst of it, like, hey, can we slow down here? I really need to slow down, right?
Yes,
And or is that allowed,
spot
right?
on.
And then be able to go, ooh, yeah, I am. I'm in a stressed place. I'm not really with you. I can see that.
Yes,
Right. Let me slow down so that I can be with you. And in that way, we can take what would have been a misaligned sexual experience
yes,
and in the middle of it start shifting it to an aligned sexual experience,
yes,
right? Which is what we're naming is the when there's a lot of safety, you can look to your partner and say, hey, whoa, 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 that doesn't feel good. Hey, can you not put your hand on my back in that spot? Can you move your hand to the back of my head?
yes,
Wow. Right. And it's not telling our partner you're doing it wrong.
yes.
It's telling our partner there's a better way,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
There's a better spot here tonight. That
Yes,
hey, that back of that small of my back feels really nice usually,
yes,
but not so feeling good today. But man,
absolutely.
that back of the head, that's feeling really good.
Yes,
Okay.
and I think what you're talking about is like the optimal place to get to, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because that requires a lot of attunement, a lot of trust that it's safe to express myself, a lot
Hmm.
of being aware of my signals all the time. So what you're
That's right.
describing, I think, is optimal. It's also quite a high level, right? To
Yeah.
have that level and awareness. So I think you're spot on. That is like the next level, right?
Yeah.
But even if you miss those parts, right, doing
Yeah.
sex, which can happen, then what we are saying is then it's okay. It's not too late. We can still have these
That's right.
conversations, right?
Yep.
Optimal, yes, if we can notice it all the time,
Yeah.
amazing. But we're gonna miss it, right? And even you and me probably miss that sometimes, just
Oh yeah.
in the heat of
All the
life.
time.
So So then afterwards, it's still okay to have that. And then you can re-engage
Yeah,
and realign, and you learn something new every time, right?
you do.
And this is what's so amazing, that then is helpful for next time, of being able to attune to new signals that you're getting. Because really, like you're saying, it is constantly changing, because
It
the
is.
external factors are different every single day. One day I'm feeling great and on a high, right? The other day I'm downbeat and just been in hospital. Everything. One day I'm tired, the other day I'm awake, right? Because so there's
Hmm.
so many factors, and of course the same for my
There is.
partner. So really, it's about being able to talk about present moment, what's changing, and maybe,
That's right.
yeah, maybe we can help people a bit about how to deliver the message. We talked a bit about that,
Yeah.
right? As a way of
Yeah.
softening the message, so it doesn't come
Yeah.
like, "Oh, you don't do this," or "You are
Right.
always this." That of course is gonna send them either in shutdown, or trying to defend themselves, right?
Yeah. So I think that's a great piece. I think the I want to name one thing about shame before we do move on, because I think it's so important. Because what happens is, we were talking about shame in a supervision group the other day, and I love the way we talked about it, naming it's like getting caught in a riptide. And even if a partner is standing safely on the shore and inviting a safe conversation
Mm.
and saying, "Hey, swim here," right? I can hold what's going on for you. I can do all those things. I can prioritize our connection right now. Shame doesn't even let good messages get to
Mhm.
their partner, right? It so distorts it, right? Which is like, if someone's caught in this riptide and someone's standing on the shore and saying, "Hey, I love you. Come back to me." Shame will take that as, see, they're telling you you're going away.
Mm.
Right? It just says, "Rrr," right? That's what shame does. And the only way to get out of the riptide, right, is to swim, not even try to swim to the shore. You'll get sucked out further,
Yes.
but to pause and swim sideways, swim parallel to the shore,
Yes.
right? And just start saying, "Okay, I'm stuck in shame. I'm really stuck in shame." And there's really no way to move forward in that conversation until we've named the shame and
Mhm.
taken a sidestep away from the conversation we were trying to have, and just go, "That's it. Like, I'm stuck in my shame, and I've got to slow down
Yes.
and bring myself out of that riptide." Right? Go on a parallel journey for a second,
Yes.
and once we get out of that riptide, we can make our way back to the shore. Right? So I like that. I like that analogy. I like that way of talking about it. But it's also letting the person know that when shame is so strong, even positive messages might not make it to your partner, and that would be really normal. And getting help around organizing how shame has impacted someone's life would be really, really helpful for these conversations.
Yes, and also when we are in a place of shame, we are not able to do the steps we talk about of
We
how to
can't.
communicate in a productive way. And I
Mm-mm.
like your analogy. I went whitewater rafting, and remember the guy
Yeah.
said, if you fall in, keep a hold of your oar, or whatever it's called. The first thing I did when I fell in was throw it away and just try to stay on top of the water, right, as you're bouncing. and
Oh, that's
and
funny.
and that's because nothing can get through in that
Right.
moment, right? And
That's right.
you're not able to communicate, either take messages in or send them out
Yeah.
properly, because
Yeah.
all you're trying to do is not to
Hey,
drown.
yeah. If you're not used to it, right?
Yes.
And then, but I will say, if you go whitewater rafting enough
Yes,
and you spend enough time in the turbulent water,
of course.
you start to learn to put, like, the way you sit down in the water matters,
Yes.
right? And how you get back to floating, because
Yes.
you don't want your feet to get caught under a
That's
rock and
right.
hold you down, like all sorts of things. But it does become accessible if you spend enough time in that
Yes.
turbulent water. And so if you get help around the shame and spend some time in that turbulent water of shame,
Yes.
you can begin to catch it. So I want to know, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of hope for anyone that gets caught up by shame.
Yes.
Is working with a good therapist to begin to organize what happens to you when that shame comes, and take that parallel step, all with the goal to be able to get back to the shore and go back to our partner and say, "Okay, I can be more present now." Right? We
Yes.
can carry on that conversation. But it's a difficult thing to navigate, right? So just a word there for shame. And if you are experiencing that, just to know that there is hope in that, and there's ways that we could begin to name what's happening and open up the relationship to actually not spend so much time being spiraled by shame, and help people be able to say, "Yep, I know when this shame comes for me. I know what's happening to me. I know what I can say to my partner. I know how to move parallel, and I know how to get back to the shore." Right?
Yes.
I think having a plan That's huge. Having a plan for when shame comes, but if we don't have a plan, then we're just going to get caught up in it. So,
Yes.
maybe we'll take an episode and talk about shame at another time. But just wanted to name that here because it is very likely having these conversations will take you down the shame road.
That's right.
So I want to go back to what we were saying is how do we begin to have this conversation? And I think one of the conversations that would be really interesting to kind of how would you approach this, right? If someone came to you and they said, like, help me. My partner says, I don't like it when you do that. And I just shut down,
Mhm.
right? Because that's often what happens. How can we help that person begin to share with their partner what happens to them? What are the messages, the scary thing that happens if their partner says, I don't like that?
Yes, and I think, and I just want to recognize again, it's not to try and make advertising for therapy, but sometimes this can be really difficult to do on your
Yeah.
own because if you've been stuck in this for too long, then sometimes it's not possible. The cycle in itself has sometimes become so strong and compelling that
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
pretty much impossible on your own to step out of
Hmm.
it, right? Even with all the best tools. So we can tell you, or do this, say it this way, and it might not still work, right? Because the distress
That's
gets
right.
so high. So there is a place where you do need someone to intervene, right? And I'm just saying that because I know
That's
that
right.
I can give some advice now, but for some people that
Yeah.
still won't work, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So if you're in Brighton and you need some help, Thomas Westenholz is saying, check him out on Psychology Today. Look him up, and he'll help you get through this conversation. If you need some help.
or if you're up north, then Michael is there.
Yeah, you can be anywhere. I'm all on
Oh, that's
Zoom.
true. That's true.
Yeah,
There we go.
yeah.
So, what did we come
So
back to? What was the question again?
coming back to this place, right, where if someone were to say to their partner, "I don't like it when you do that," but their partner shuts down, how would we help them organize like what's happening in that shutdown place
Yes.
to be able to help their partner hear the scary messages that get stirred when that happens?
Yes. And actually, I think you gave a really good framework for this in our last podcast. I
Mhm.
think it was, which is kind of based on the whole EFT model, right? Which is to look at what is kind of the cue, what is happening that caused my distress. And
Mhm.
that might be hearing this message, oh, you didn't do this right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Then the second part is, what did that mean for me when I heard
That's right.
that, right? What did I make it mean? Did I say, I'm not a good lover?
Mhm.
I'm not good enough, or I can't really get this right, or she doesn't really want to be sexual with me anymore. What do you make that message
Oof,
mean, right?
man,
Yeah,
that what you're naming there, right? All of that, right? I'm sure some people are listening and going, "Yeah, I do that."
that's
And just to
right.
give a handhold, that's fear,
Yes,
right? That's fear.
yes,
Fear starts to stir and says, "Maybe I'm not doing it right. Maybe I'm not a good lover."
that's right.
Wow.
And that's
Okay.
and that's really painful, right? And I'm kind of
Yeah.
just re-emphasizing the model you gave in the last podcast
Hmm.
because right, you're asking people might not have listened to that. So then we
Hmm.
make a meaning out of it. Then how do you then respond? Yeah, what's your
Hmm.
initial reaction to what's happening right now? Is it that you want to fight back? You want to tell them how wrong they are and how it's their
Hmm.
fault, which is a natural defensive response. But as we said
Hmm.
before, not going to be productive, but it's a natural response. Or do you just want to shut down and get away? Because the overwhelming message for you is, I'm never going to get it right. Yeah. And what is then
Hmm.
your action tendency, the impulse, how you want to react or tend to react?
That's
Yeah.
right.
It's good to just have some awareness of that because then maybe
Yeah.
we can slow it down and we don't
Yeah.
have to go straight on autopilot. We don't have to accept the initial narrative that your mind makes
That's
out
right.
of this, which is just that. It is just a
That's
narrative.
right.
It is not reality, but the narrative is very painful, right? So
Right.
that can give us that perspective to look at it and say, oh, this is what I tell myself. But that
Hmm.
doesn't mean it's a truth. And then what
Yeah.
is my response to that narrative that my brain gives me? And how does that feel? What
Yeah.
do you, which might can be the harder part, right? What am I actually feeling when I start telling myself that I can't get it right, that I'm not good enough, right? And we often have to slow down to be able to
Hmm.
feel. We are often in such a rush that we don't feel
Yeah.
for a purpose, right? We don't want to feel. But if
Yeah.
you slow down and just sit with this right now, the narrative, the meaning that you make, what's happening internally, what do you
Hmm.
notice if you notice anything in your body? What's
Hmm.
coming up? It might be a sense of sadness, right?
Hmm.
It might be anger. It might, whatever might come up. Again, we don't have to judge it. Yeah, they're valid emotion trying to communicate something. So this is kind of the framework you gave, right? And that gives us a new place to start communicating what's happening internally
That's
instead of
right.
making it about you, which is
Right.
external, right?
Right. Right.
So that now allow the opportunity to start saying, actually, and I know this is complex and it sounds very easy, us sitting
Yeah.
calm here. It's very difficult to do when we feel under threat.
Yeah.
But, the point is here, you can now communicate to your partner and say, hey,
Yeah.
when I heard you say that I got this wrong, I told myself that it meant I'm not a good lover.
Hmm.
And I felt this tension, contraction, and I just felt a sense of sadness,
Right.
right? That's a
Yeah.
very
And the point
new,
being, you can come do that later. You don't have to like that.
yeah.
This might be, we haven't had sex in 2 weeks, but I've been avoiding it because the last time we had sex, you said something like, hey, that doesn't feel good. And man, it really shut me down.
Mhm.
Right. We can come back and hold this conversation like you were saying.
And I think realistically, that's often what's going to happen. It's
That's going to be the
very,
place to start.
very rare that we can do this in the moment, right? And
Right.
even less
Not,
so.
especially if we're not talking about it ever.
Yes, exactly.
Right. You're likely going to have to do this on a Tuesday evening when sex isn't on the table.
Yes, and you
Right.
normally can't do this when you're distressed, this process, right? That's what I'm
Very
so
difficult.
often what happens is you're distressed and it's okay if you need to remove yourself because it only escalate, right? But
Right.
you could even
Right.
say, I will come back. I just need
Yeah.
to collect what's happening and I'm not
Right.
sure right now what's going on, except that I
Yeah.
want to go into my normal run away or attack you
Yes. Right.
and I don't
Yeah.
want to do that. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to remove myself, but I will be back. And
I will
that's
be
quite
back.
an important message to send the last piece. I
That's
will
right.
be back. Because if we just disengage, it often just sends the signal again, I'm abandoning you. I don't care, right?
Hmm.
And so it
Hmm.
goes on. So it's an important little piece to say, I will be
Hmm.
back. It says, I care, but I need to regulate before I can engage in a
Yeah.
productive way, right?
Yeah. And I'll say this too, you were naming how if we do the same thing, we're going to get the same thing. Right. And so, we're naming part of the beginning of the episode. We said the blockers to a meaningful conversation is one of them is shutting down. And if my response is to stay shut down, the truth of the silence is whatever meaning I make, right? If I make the meaning that that my partner doesn't think I'm a good lover, if I stay silent and I stay withdrawn, then that becomes truth. It becomes the only message I hear. I don't get an opportunity for my partner to reassure me something different,
Mhm.
right? And so what that might look like is coming to a partner in a moment of reflection and engaging around that. You can say, hey, when one thing I'm noticing is when I hear that message that I did the wrong thing sexually or it didn't feel good to you, my performance strategy gets really rocked. Like I'm not performing well enough. And if I'm not performing for you, my fear is you will not love me.
Yes. Beautiful.
And then I shut down. And I don't normally tell you that because
Yes.
I get too scared that you're going to tell me I'm right. Right. We can say that to our partner, and then our partner can respond with, wow, right? I had no idea that's what was happening to you. When we share this in session, partners are usually blown away that moments like that for one partner might just be, I was just trying to help them do something good for me because I wanted it to feel good, but I wanted, I didn't know it was going to rock him that hard.
Mm.
And then our partner can offer reassurance like, oh, hey, you are doing a great job around some things. I am so in love with you. I don't think you are like not performing sexually, right? That moment isn't a global moment for me.
Mhm.
Without being able to get that reassurance, like I said, the silence defines the truth
Yes.
and the message is stirred. But when we can send that message that's really clear to our partner, and our partner can say to us, that's not my experience, right? Let me share with you, you are a good lover.
Yes.
I know you're a good lover.
Yes.
You have been a good lover. I'm confident you will continue to be a good lover.
Yes.
And then we can start getting soothed in the place that our fear is actually stirring. In the place where we're telling ourselves we won't be seen as good, our partner can say, I see you as good. I experience you as good.
Yes.
Then we can start to get something different in our relationship. And this goes on both sides of the fence, right?
Yes.
Both sides of this sexual dance have to take that risk and begin to share when you turn and roll away from me,
Yes.
right? Or you know, when you only pursue me sexually and it feels like I'm just an object to you, but I don't have you come to me emotionally. Here's what happens to me. It feels like you don't want all of me,
Yes.
right? Then I feel like an object. And then I start to feel kind of used. And that doesn't really drive my sexuality because I want to have a good sexual relationship with you, but I don't want to feel used,
That's right.
right? These are difficult things to share. They're really vulnerable things to share. And in those moments can startups, defensiveness can show up right there. And so just be really mindful of your own defensiveness, right? And, if you say, oh, when you say this, it's like, well, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean you're not a good lover, right? That's, again, we're going right to the trash bin,
Yes. And
right?
I think this is spot on. And also there's just this magic of curiosity. So even if there are
Mm-hmm.
some dynamics where maybe the sexual encounters haven't been very good, right? And we
Yeah.
can easily go into the performance model of, oh, I'm not a good lover. Then there's a magic just in communicating to your partner that you're curious about learning about them and
Mm-hmm.
what they actually do like. Because that message is saying, I care about you. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's an important message. And sometimes, I would say all the time, actually more important than what performance you brought. Because if you're open and curious, you can learn and figure it out
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then it's actually okay that you don't know exactly what they like, but it changes the whole framework, right? If you've been for many years just doing the things you've been doing, the other person feeling dissatisfied, they would eventually also pull away, right? Even if
Yeah.
you've been good co-parents and maybe other things in life seem pretty okay, right? And peaceful
Mm-hmm.
and calm, they might still pull away. And that can be, I recognize that can be a devastating message for some people to get, that actually what we've been
Absolutely.
doing weren't working for me. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't make you inadequate. It just meant you never had open curiosity yet, right? Because you could
Right.
not know what your partner knew or want or
Nope.
like without having had open conversations. Nobody
Yeah.
knows. Nobody
Right.
knows, right? So just the first step for maybe a more avoidant partner could be just having the curiosity and know there's nothing wrong with you for not knowing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. Right. Again, we keep coming to that place, right? Where finding a way to begin the conversation, whether you're beginning with your partner around, hey, we don't talk about sex and I'd like to find a way to do that. Right. Or you're trying some of these more, maybe a little bit more of a depth move where it goes, hey, when this happens to us sexually, right? When you turn away or when you leave the room, right? Or when you get angry and frustrated, this is what happens to me. My whole world starts to shatter, right?
Yes.
And if you're trying that, the point we want to be really clear about is when we're not talking about sex, we're the chances of sexual relationships, sexual encounters, sexual fun are very small,
Yep.
right? Because we're going to get it wrong and it's going to feel personal. And so finding ways to keep talking about this, keep bringing it up, uh, and checking our own defensiveness, our own desire to shut down, and our own desire to blame, checking those things constantly when we try to have these conversations. Yeah.
That's right. And I think that's a great place to end. I know this
Yeah.
is a
Yeah. Because
fascinating
it's getting,
topic and we can
it
talk about
is.
it. So
It's a little bit longer of an episode today, but I think that's because it's a huge topic
it
and it's so
is.
important to
It
name it,
is.
name the vulnerability and take it easy. And we're going to keep talking about this, right? And all of the conversations we have on this podcast about how to have conversations, they're going to apply to the sexual conversation as well.
That's right. That's right. So thank you
All
so
right.
much. And I
Yeah.
hope you guys took something away from this. This is over and out for this week from
Yeah. All right.
Couples in Focus. And I'll see you next week, Michael.
Good to see you, Thomas.
Take care.
Bye now.